we all get like trained as acquisition entrepreneurs. We drink the Kool-Aid. It's like, oh yeah, don't make any big changes in the first like couple months. And it's like, if you build rapport with your people and like you're a pretty decent human being, and people can understand like and tell that your intentions are pure to do good things for them and for the business, like people are going to welcome change.
Welcome to So You Want to Buy a Business, a podcast about the ETA journey. My name is Kira Hamilton, and my guest today is Landon Mance. He's an experienced wealth manager and the co-owner of Backbone Planning Partners and Nevada Tree Services. Let's get into his ETA journey. Landon, welcome to So You Want to Buy a Business. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here. Looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, let's start with an introduction. Can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yep. Who I am. So I am a husband. I am a father to twins who just turned 4. I'm a family man and I'm an entrepreneur.
Very exciting. Well, I'm looking forward to getting into your entrepreneurial journey. You are coming up on 1 year since closing on Nevada Tree Services. Congratulations. I want to get into what that year has been like. Let's go back a little bit. How did you first get interested in ETA? How were you introduced to the idea and what was appealing about it to you?
Yeah. So I started my career as a financial advisor back in like 2009, 2010. I did an internship for a guy and was like, hey, I think I could probably do your job. And so went out and got hired by a company, not that company because it was not the right fit for me. I'm a people person, and that company was like just old and crusty and staunchy and not for me. So I went out and got hired by a great company, Waddell and Reed, and had the opportunity to work under um, one of the most successful advisors in that entire company. And at the time, they had like several thousand advisors. Really great guy out of Orange County. So worked for him or worked underneath him and was trying to build a financial advisory practice. I left the industry for about 18 months and I moved to Southern Utah. So I was living in Southern California. Moved to Southern Utah, had a great experience there. Worked for a friend of mine who owned a few companies there, and he'd been asking me to come out and work for him, and so I did. I just picked up and moved from Long Beach, California, to St. George, Utah. And anybody that has been to either one of those places will know that, like, I mean, that's like the biggest cultural shift like you could probably ever make. Long Beach is one of the most diverse cities in the country, and St. George, Utah, is not. Couldn't be much farther away from that, but it's a great place to live. It's a great place to raise a family, and so I lived there, got some startup experience, and then I moved to Las Vegas in December of 2011, and I got back into I guess my day job, which is being a wealth manager. So fast forward to 2015, I left JP Morgan, started my own practice, and naturally I was investing a lot of my discretionary dollars into the public markets, stocks basically, because that's what I knew, right? So come into, I don't know, 2018, 2019, I started doing a lot of private investing, um, mostly into real estate. I started investing in other holding companies. Then I did a couple of investments into like a specific, business that was being bought, not into a, more of a fund structure. And then in 2020, I guess it probably was, I'm like, I'm going to buy a business as an investment. So that's when my search started. It was extremely informal. I was still a full-time, wealth manager at that time. Fast forward a couple years, I was playing pickleball. This would have been November of 22, playing pickleball with a buddy of mine. I'm like, dude, I've been looking for a business to buy for a couple years. I need to partner with somebody that can run that business. What do you think? And he's like, let's do it. I'm like, seriously? He's like, yeah, let's do it. That was November. And in January, Nevada Tree came onto the market, came off the market almost immediately. Deal fell through, came back onto the market in February or late January. Got back in touch with the broker who I know personally, and we ended up buying Nevada Tree and closing on June 1 of last year.
Congratulations. So when we're recording, that's just a few days away from coming up to your 1 year anniversary. So it sounds like you were searching for a couple years, just kind of part time, and then it got more serious when you and Luke is your partner's name, right? Got involved and
Mm-hmm.
started searching together. Tell me, once you decided to partner, what were the criteria you were looking for? What were you actually setting out to find?
Yeah, you mean like in a partner or in the business?
Oh, yeah, good clarifying question. I want to come back to the partnership in the business itself. What were you looking for?
Yeah, yeah. So um, it was vague in the sense that we didn't have like a specific industry that we were looking in. In our wealth management business, prior to buying the business for several years, our main focus had been on serving entrepreneurs. So, and we weren't just like doing all their personal wealth management. We do a lot of like business consultancy type services. So we would dig in deep to work alongside our business owners to just be a sounding board for them, to help them to um, build better businesses, more transferable businesses, and hire better people, and just do a lot of stuff that made their businesses just better across the board. So I had a pretty good sense of what I call like a fundamentally sound small business would look like. And I'm not an expert by any stretch, but I'd seen enough small businesses to kind of know like what a good one looked like and what a not so good one looked like. And when I say a small business, I'm going to say, you know, anything less than $10 million dollars in revenue. So when we came across Nevada Tree, we found what we believe to be and still believe to be a fundamentally sound small business. So, I mean, I'm happy to elaborate on that if a little bit if you think it would be helpful. Otherwise, we can just we can go with that.
Yeah, I'd love for you to elaborate. What does that mean? What does it look like for a business to be fundamentally sound from your perspective?
Yeah. Okay. For sure. So, a business this size, essentially, this business was doing about $1 million a year in revenue. So, very very small. I mean, on the small side of small businesses that are listed for sale, or at least like on the smaller side of a business that like a searcher would be interested in for sure. But the margins in this business are incredible, so it kind of makes up for that lack of you know multi millions of revenue that we usually look for as searchers. So the business was certainly dependent on the owners, but not heavily dependent. So they had a sales guy that did the vast majority of their estimates. They had an administrative person that did, the vast amount of the administrative tasks. They had the crew that actually went out and did the work. And so they had good enough systems in place to where if the owners, because it was a husband and wife, I mean, if they were out of pocket for a couple weeks, like, would it run as smoothly? Probably not. But it would still run, and you're not going to see some massive drop off in productivity at all because They had good technology that they used. They had a lot of customers that have been working with them for years. If you look at all of the tree service companies in Las Vegas, we've got 570 reviews. I think the next closest competitor is like 150 or 200 less than we are. So there was just a lot of really good things about this business that I loved. And so we moved very quickly on it. And yeah, we're able to close in what, 3, 4 months?
That is moving fast. Did you or Luke have any experience with trees in this industry? And it sounds like not. If not, how did you feel about moving into an industry you weren't that familiar with on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis?
So zero experience. I was talking to somebody the other day. I think I was wearing my Nevada Tree Service hat, and they're like, "Oh, is that your company?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it is." And so they started asking some questions about this and that, and I'm like, "Look, I'm like, I'm not the right person to answer those questions. I still couldn't start a chainsaw. I've never been up in a tree. I don't know much about pruning or tree health. I just don't because I'm not that active in that element of the business. I'm more leading and guiding, helping with strategy, finance, things of that nature. But I'm not really down in the weeds in the operations. I mean, I'm not actually at all. So we had zero experience. Um, you know, I believe, and I think it's been proved time and time again now. Listening to conversations from searchers who have acquired, businesses and industries that they had essentially zero experience in. Like, I don't think that should be a big deterrent because um, are there certain elements of industries that you know you kind of like have to have experience to be successful? Definitely. But in most businesses, I just don't believe that to be the case. If you are curious enough and you are willing to invest the time, the energy, the resources, and the capital into learning an industry over the course of, call it 1 to 3 years, like I believe that you could almost buy a business and be successful in any industry, regardless of your experience.
Tell me more about how you finance the deal. Purchase price, structure. Can you break that down for me?
Yep, yep, absolutely. So I think the business was listed for 1.8 off of about basically 600,000 of SDE, essentially. The business had no debt. It had a yard that they parked the vehicles at that was one of their investment properties that they owned outright, so they weren't charging themselves rent. Ran the business from home, so no rent for office space. So this business was run as lean as one could run a business. The husband, so it was husband and wife that ran the business. She did like bookkeeping and some other administrative, stuff. Getting all the license, city licensure, and maintaining all those and that kind of stuff. And then he was responsible for like the scheduling and the routing. He also had extensive experience in like tree work. So any of the more complex jobs, he would go out and help strategize around what was going to take place on that particular job. So the business was just ran incredibly lean, right? So, I mean, we're talking 60% net margins. I mean, just it was an incredibly profitable small business. We knew that we wouldn't be able to run it nearly that lean, but still the numbers still made pretty good sense. So we bought the business for 1,650,000. We put down about 500 and either 500 or 550,000 of equity. The vast majority of that came from me, and then Luke put some in as well. The deal structure was uh, nothing. There's nothing sexy or fancy about it at all. So we did an SBA loan. It was essentially 1.2 million. Our rate is 11 and a quarter. So we pay about $10,000 a month in interest. So that's a little that's a little unfortunate that we just happen to buy a business when the rates are the highest they've been in a couple decades. But still, the business can support that easily. And because we were able to make a larger equity injection, that obviously helps significantly. And that's always one piece of advice that I have for people that are especially buying into an industry that you don't have a ton of experience in. Like, don't just do the 5 or 10% down. Like, find a way to put 10 or 20, I'm sorry, put 20 or 30 or 50% equity down, because that margin of error is going to be much more gracious. So I would encourage everybody that's buying a business, I guess regardless of if you have industry experience or not, but try to get your equity injection like above 20%, because you'll thank yourself later. So yeah, so about a million to SBA, about 500,000 of equity, 550. So our total project cost was $1,000,008, like almost to the penny. So 165 purchase price, $100,000 injected of working capital, and about $50,000 in closing costs for the loan. So total project cost was like almost exactly 1.8 million.
Did that end up feeling like an appropriate amount of working capital?
Uh, yeah, it did. It absolutely did. I mean, I think it was conservative for sure. Um, we could have, we could have easily been fine with 50 or even 25,000, because when we bought the business, they had it was right in the peak season, so we were booked out, 3 to 4 weeks when we bought the business, which was great. Um, and again, because we had a bigger equity injection, even with our debt payment of 16,000, $500 a month, the business was cash flowing nicely. I mean, from day one. So, I mean, just with the work that we were, had on the books, um, I mean, technically, we would have been fine with no working capital, really, because again, I'm not taking any money out of the business, so we were able to kind of grow the cash value, in the working capital account. I mean, essentially from day one. So, but yeah, 100,000 proved to be a perfect number.
And tell me about your process with SBA. It sounds like this was probably the first time you had been an SBA borrower. What was that experience like for you?
So yeah, I mean, definitely my first time SBA, but I'm in the financial services industry, and we used to be regulated by both governing bodies. The two main bodies are FINRA and the SEC. So I'm used to a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork and disclosures and all that kind of stuff. So it's not like the whole process caught me off guard. um, i used um, I used a company called Multifunding. Fran over at Multifunding, he's awesome. Fran's he's phenomenal. So he's basically a broker, so he's got different lenders that he works with, and we ended up going with this one company, and they were fine. Um, it's been a different experience with them post close, because they're not really set up to service loans. So it's been really interesting working with them after the acquisition. My lender provided zero value through the diligence process and through the close, and certainly zero value post close. So they're just a vendor. I don't consider them to be a partner or nothing like that. But
There's such a wide range of SBA lenders out
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
They'll
for
offer
sure.
something different. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But yeah, I mean, overall, the experience was fine. I mean, it helps a lot that you've got really responsive sellers. So anytime something was asked of them, I mean, she was like, you know, just all over it. I mean, Johnny on the spot. If we asked her for something, she would typically get it to us same day, if not with for sure within 1 to 3 business days. So she was all over it. So that made the experience quite a bit easier and allowed us to have a pretty, productive experience going through diligence and then getting to close in a relatively short amount of time.
Having an engaged and cooperative seller makes all the difference for sure. Let's talk more about your partnership with Luke. So you went into this acquisition with a partner. A lot of the searchers I talk to are kind of in the place where they're deciding whether or not they want to go it on their own, bring in a partner, bring in investors, kind of how they want to structure their team. What made you decide you wanted to partner with just someone in general for an acquisition?
Yeah. So my my plan B was to operate the business myself until I had a an operating partner. Um, One thing that I have learned over the years is that uh, people rush into business partnerships with people that they essentially don't know. I mean, they know them, but like, do they really actually know them? Have they spent meaningful time with those people? And my definition of meaningful time is probably a lot different than most. I would say to really get to know someone, you've got to spend 50 to 100 hours with them. So lunches, uh, spouse dinners, recreational sports, walking, um, Starbucks conversations, car rides. Um, all these little things allow you to get to know somebody. An example that I love to use is going out to eat multiple times with somebody before you become business partners. And I want you to look at how they treat the hostess, how they treat the busser, how they treat the server, how they treat the table that you sit at. Like when you leave, do they just leave this massive mess? Or do they take the crumbled up napkin and scoop stuff onto the plate and put the silverware onto the plates and make the job a little bit easier for the busing crew? Like all those little tiny details, pay attention to those because that's going to tell you a lot about somebody other than like just the words, that so look for all that kind of stuff. So when I went into my partnership with Luke, him and I had been neighbors, so we literally lived 2 houses down and had lived 2 houses down from each other. Not that long, but at that time, probably uh, a year and a half, maybe 2 years. So we've been getting to know each other. We go to church together. So we just by virtue of us going to church together, we share a lot of the same values, at least on the surface. So I knew what kind of person that Luke was. Okay. I didn't know what kind of businessman Luke was because he didn't have any experience in small business, zero. He had always worked for large and mega corporations. He worked for Discover, for a number of years, and then he worked for a competitor at a much smaller scale, but still that company had, 1,200 employees. So he's always worked for big mega corporations. So he had zero small business experience. But I knew that if I was putting together a trampoline in my backyard, for Christmas for my twins, that Luke would be the first person I would call, and he would be over in a few minutes to help. If my car broke down on the freeway 20 miles away from my house, I know that I could call Luke, and he'd be like, "Dude, where are you? See you in 10." Like that's the kind of person that he was, And so I knew that him as an operator, that like he was going to do whatever needed to be done to be successful. And I had all the confidence in the world that that was going to be him. And it has definitely proved to be that case.
So it wasn't just the case that you were looking for someone to come on and help you with the equity injection. You were really looking for someone to partner with you in operating the business because it sounds like, you've got other businesses, other ventures. You weren't looking to take on full-time work with this acquisition. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. So the plan was always from day one to have an operating partner. And the plan B was, if I found a small business that I really liked and I wanted to buy and I did not have an operating partner, that I would buy it and figure it out. So I would operate it until I found somebody else to step in and take over. But I was just lucky enough to meet or to proposition Luke at the right time. He was ready to get out of corporate, America, loves small business, always kind of wanted and hoped, to be an entrepreneur. So I just happened to get lucky. The timing was right. The stars aligned. He was ready to do it right away. And it was crazy because we had this conversation in November and we were under LOI to buy Nevada Tree Service less than 90 days after we had this conversation. So things
Wow.
moved quickly after that. Yeah.
That, yeah, things did move quickly, and it sounds like you two were already in a certain level of alignment. You had some shared values, neighbors. You went to church together. Tell me a little bit more about how you grew your business partnership. Like, what kinds of conversations were you having early on to figure out, are we compatible business wise, and how can we best partner together?
Yeah. Yeah. So just um, constant, consistent, transparent, no holds bar communication. Um, so I always communicated to Luke, like I would always like tell him like if there's something that's happening between us, like if you don't like how I folded a piece of paper and slid over to you, if you don't like how I talked to one of the employees, if you loved how I thought about this particular problem, like tell me this stuff so that we can spend more time on it if we need to, or less time on it. And just this very regular, open, ongoing dialogue of all things important relating to our personal relationship and our business relationship. Because there's a lot of overlap there, right? Our kids are this, we've got kids the same age. We live two doors down. We go to church together. So we see them and spend a lot of time with them. And now we're getting into this business relationship. So, in order for there to be continued success on the personal and the professional side, like there just had to be this really productive, like over communicating relationship. And so I think that's why I think we've been successful as partners.
Was it clear before you closed on the business what your different responsibilities day to day were going to look like, or is that something you've had to figure out over time?
Yeah, great question. So I would say crystal clear. Basically Luke was going to be the day-to-day operator, the GM, the general manager of the business. He was going to run the business operations day in and day out. My job was always going to be responsible for finance, for all the money in, money out, uh, big purchases, financing, cash flow management, all that kind of stuff. That was me, and everything else, business operations, was going to be him. Now, from day one, we got into a regular cadence of having a weekly conversation an hour that was set aside to like work on the business, not in it, right? And we started working with a coach, not from day one, but I think we've been working with Chris since August or September of last year.
What kind of coach is
So
this?
yeah, so Chris White is he was an EOS coach for a long, long time. I think he was like one of the first 20 or 50 EOS, implementers. So he's was like OG status. Actually, Chris and a couple other guys, I believe, they actually founded and created the software that EOS implementers were using with their business owner clients, for many, many years. And so Chris has been a coach forever. I think he's worked with, a few hundred, businesses. So we started working with Chris very early on. So he helped to facilitate conversations between us, helped us to set, our big picture goals, and then drill that down to 3 year, 1 year, and quarterly goals. Um, Identify our mission, vision, values, all that good stuff, and then get into a really productive cadence to continue to have ongoing structured conversations. So that's been extremely impactful as well.
Like I was saying in our pre-chat, I think beyond choosing who you're going to marry, choosing a business partner is probably one of the most important relationship decisions you're going to make. And like you're saying, it's not enough to just, oh, we were in school together, this seems like a good person to partner with, or this person can bring cash to the table. It's so important to have a strong understanding of who this person is, because once you sign that paperwork and you've closed and you're in business together, that is a huge commitment. So I really appreciate what you're saying. So you guys close on this business, do it relatively quickly. Was there anything in particular that you feel like helped you to move fast once you and Luke decided to partner together? Your time to acquiring was pretty short.
Yeah. Um, I don't think there's anything that like really stood out. Again, really responsive. Well, being really responsive as buyers and really responsive sellers. I mean, that's a pretty good formula. The sellers were really flexible and allowed us to spend a significant amount of time with them in diligence. Like there would be several weeks in a row where we would just show up at their house at 8 a.m. and we'd stay till noon. Sometimes we'd stay till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon sometimes. So we spent significant time with them in person, watching them operate the business. We got to meet some of the staff before close, but they were they were pretty guarded with that, which is normal. But we did get to meet a couple of the staff before close, so that was helpful. But yeah, I mean, just them being open to us spending a bunch of time with them, being flexible and being super responsive, on both sides of the table just allowed us to get to a close pretty quickly. It was interesting because the husband went on a trip down to Baja, Mexico for a dirt biking race or excursion, and he almost died. Uh, he got in a really gnarly motorcycle accident and was very lucky to have survived it. And the story is kind of wild. They basically they knew this guy that had an airplane, and by the grace of God, they were able to get this guy to fly down to Mexico and get him and like bring him back, and just how it all came together was spectacular. But yeah, he was lucky. He was very lucky to have survived it. I mean, the injuries that he sustained were very significant, And so we had a lot of flexibility on our end as well, right? Because he was in the hospital for several weeks, and so obviously he had to be removed, from the diligence process. So there was also a lot of flexibility, and understanding on our side as well. And I think that also that that really lended well to like trust and confidence, in us, in our ability to kind of, let things happen as they were, because they needed to, they weren't like pushing the brake, but they were definitely easing up off the gas pedal pretty significantly there for several weeks or a month, because there were more important things like, the health and well-being of her husband, who was arguably fighting for his life for a while there in the hospital.
Wow, I'm I'm really glad to hear that story has a good ending and that he was okay. That sounds like a really challenging circumstance, and I'm sure it went a long way with the sellers that you guys were accommodating and understanding of that. Speaking of the husband, it sounds like he had a pretty significant hand in day to day operations. It sounds like he was pretty well versed with trees. With him stepping out of the business, how did you guys plan to compensate for losing that skill set and that set of knowledge? And how did that go? Were you successful in that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And the answer is, um, yeah, we were definitely successful. Unfortunately, our relationship with them went in the wrong direction after close. So we had a really great relationship with them and thought very highly of them. And I think the feeling was mutual, going through diligence into close. And yeah, unfortunately, after close, it did not continue to head in that prosperous direction. So we were still able to lean on him quite a bit, right after close. So call it, you know, several weeks or maybe a month or two, after the close, we were still heavily relying on asking for his help, and he was generous in helping and giving us his time. And then it just kind of took a turn, and just a few short months after acquisition, we were, you know, uh, essentially on our own to kind of figure things out. And that's okay. Again, they were gracious in helping us after close, and we felt pretty confident in our ability to operate the business without any further guidance. But regardless, it was going to happen at some point. So you just you gotta pull the ripcord at some point post close. And in my experience, a lot of owners, they'll tell you everything that you want to hear, going through diligence and getting to close, and then you close, and you know their tune just changes. And I don't think it's malicious. I think it's just, there's just a massive mentality shift. Like when you go from being in the corner office and signing all the checks and everyone being dependent on you and your phone ringing, all day, to having none of that, it is it's a lot to deal with, and a lot of people don't deal with it very very well. When we were, after we closed on this business and as we were coming into close, the husband was, he's kind of this bigger guy, kind of gruff, and you know we saw him break down in tears like multiple times. And I think his wife has said, she's like, I don't think I'd seen him cry in like 10 years or something. We saw him cry multiple times over a few short months. So the emotion of departing from a business that you've been running, for years or decades, um, it's a lot. It's a lot for people to deal with, and it's not easy. And there's a lot of emotions involved in that people just don't ever think that they were going to experience. But when you start to go through it and you start to get in your feels and you start to realize that this chapter of your life is closing, like it's a lot for people to process. So I don't think it was malicious. I don't think it is generally malicious when that happens, but I think it's just kind of the nature of us as human beings.
Is there anything that you think would have made that process go differently or more smoothly, or do you wish you'd been better prepared in any way?
Not really. Yeah, I mean, one of the big mistakes that we made was around diligencing the vehicles and the equipment. So we just kind of like took their word for the most part that like stuff was functioning and operating the way that it should, and uh, maybe they did believe that, but that was certainly not the case after close. I mean, we spent tens and tens of thousands of dollars fixing vehicles and equipment within a few short months after close. And like basically they communicated us like, oh yeah, everything is going to be a-okay. It's going to, you're going to just run this business just as smoothly as we did, from day one. And um, that was just not the case when it came to vehicles and equipment. Luckily, I was not smart enough, but luckily I was maybe naive enough to build out into my pro forma. I basically like tripled the amount allocated to vehicles and equipment repair because we knew that the husband was relatively savvy fixing vehicles and equipment himself. He was a band-aid fixer, but he would still fix them. And so luckily we budgeted, about three times what they were spending on vehicles and equipment. And that helped a lot. So it wasn't nearly as much of a gut punch as it may have been because we, at least on paper, anticipated it happening.
I think that points to this idea that it's really important to understand what the current owners are actually doing because there can be these hidden costs depending on how the owners are operating. They may be doing some of the repairs, some of the work themselves. It's not perhaps showing up on the P&L, and having an understanding of that and knowing, okay, well, when I come in, if I don't have this skill set, I'm either going to have to hire for it or learn it or whatever the case may be. Tell me a little bit about how the transition went. I think there's this balance when you take over a business of you want to learn operations, you want to learn the way it's running. There's a reason this business was appealing to you. But then at some point, you also want to make it your own. You may want to make some changes. How did you and Luke treat those first few months? Did you implement change immediately? Did you have some period of time where you just got to know it? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So our goal going into the acquisition of Nevada Tree Service, I mean, really for the first 12 months was to just maintain. The company had historically done, 850 to a million 50, I think was their best year, I believe, of revenue. So our goal was to maintain. When you go out and buy a business, if your plan is to hold this business, right? So there's no plan for you to buy this and flip it in 3 years or 5 years. Like if your plan is to buy a great business and hold that business for some long period of time, like what's 1 year, right? What's 1 year? What's 6 months or a year or 2 years? Like that's nothing. So spend the time to actually just learn the business. There's so much talk around like growth, 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 implementing technology, get rid of the fax machine, you know, um, and that's all good stuff. But like that doesn't need to happen in the first 3 or 6 or 12 months. If you buy a fundamentally sound small business, like unless you just screw things up majorly and make some really stupid decisions, then like hopefully the business should at least like maintain what was happening, for your first 12 months versus, the prior 12 months of you closing. And so that was our goal. Our goal was to maintain. Now, does that mean that we just like rested on our laurels for a year and did nothing. No, no, absolutely not. So one of, like, for example, they were still cutting their guys paper checks. Like every week or every 2 weeks, they were physically writing out checks and handing the checks to their teams. So we're like, okay, definitely not doing that. So we got them, I use Gusto for all my businesses. So we got them onto Gusto within a month, right? And so we just said, hey, like, we're not going to be making, any big radical changes, but we're also not going to just continue to write you guys checks. Like, that's way too inefficient. And everyone was like, great. We've been asking for direct deposit for a while, so thank you. Right? Like, who wants to get a physical check as opposed to a direct deposit anymore? So we certainly made some changes, but they were, they're not like, we weren't moving any mountains. We didn't do anything radical to like compensation. If anything, it was, we needed to bring some people up to market level pay. So we did that right away. And that conversation was great. Was like, hey, you're super valuable to this company, and you're not getting paid enough. So we're going to pay you a little bit more, closer to what we believe that your value is. So we did that with a couple people. And so all the changes that we made were like welcomed with big wide open arms. um I don't know, it's kind of interesting. You hear like on all these interviews that, like, oh, it's like we all get like trained as acquisition entrepreneurs. We drink the Kool-Aid. It's like, oh yeah, don't make any big changes in the first like couple months. And it's like, if you build rapport with your people and like you're a pretty decent human being, and people can understand, like, and tell that your intentions are pure to do good things for them and for the business, like, people are going to welcome change, you know? And so that was our experience. And as we set our values for the company, like one of the values that we set for the company was like safety above all else. Like, we don't care how big the job is, how profitable the job is. If we identify some major safety concerns in a job, we just won't do it, period. Because our guys are going home to their families every night. And there is no amount of money in the world that is going to jeopardize us, that is going to lead us to make a decision that would jeopardize that. And so in your actions, people understand and realize what your intentions are. They're not going to do that by your words. They're going to do that by your actions. And so as we started to make changes in the business, productive changes, they were welcomed, like I said, with big, wide open arms from essentially everybody in the team. And we've gotten zero pushback from people on the changes that we wanted to make, because when you're looking at changes through the lens of not just you as the owners and like what it means, like the bottom line, but you're making changes through this lens of what does it mean for us as owners and for the bottom line? What does it mean for the team from an operational perspective and a morale perspective? And when you look at all these different angles, how your decisions affect people, and then you just make decisions like in consideration of all those different lenses, I think you're generally going to make pretty good decisions. And I think that people are going to respect you a lot for those.
I mean, your people are your business, right? Your team, that is your business. If they feel that you care about them, not just in what you're saying, but in what you're doing, your business is going to be more successful. So I think that's the only approach to take with small business is people first. So Landon, you're a year in. Anything surprising that's come up in the last year of owning this business?
Well, it was definitely surprising to realize how incredibly expensive it is to register a vehicle in the state of Nevada. So we just bought a brand new bucket truck like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and it was $175,000 purchase, and then we get it registered and registered and insured, and have to pay the taxes on it. And it was like I mean, it's just crazy. You know, to register the vehicle costs us like $4,000. I mean, it's just preposterous. So that was a big shock. But other than that, um, you know, I think the biggest challenge that we've had is actually getting enough leads in to grow the business, right? Because the last few months we've definitely shifted gears from like maintaining to, all right, we're ready to put our foot on the gas pedal. But it doesn't matter how hard you push down on the gas pedal. If there's not enough gas in the tank, aka leads, like you're not going to go anywhere. So we've experienced that where we're ready to grow, we want to grow, but we just don't have the demand isn't there. So that's been really interesting. Just working through that and trying to figure out how to grow the business and get enough leads coming in. So we've got some really great thoughts and initiatives, you know, that we're going to be focusing on. But um, that's been a challenge for sure.
So, Landon, in your experience, what do you think are some of the qualities that make someone successful in ETA?
Mm. Curiosity, grit, integrity, and persistence.
Those are all very key. Landon, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your journey. Super interesting to hear about your experience with ETA, and I'm excited to see where you go next with Nevada Tree.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation, Kira. Appreciate you.
Yeah, have a great weekend. Thanks for
Yeah,
joining.
yeah, thanks. You too.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of So You Want to Buy a Business. I hope you enjoyed it. Please check out the show notes for ways to connect with me and with Landon. And please like, rate, review, subscribe to the show on whatever platform you are viewing it on or listening to it on. And I'll see you in the next episode.